So it's my pleasure to welcome here Deputy Minister Dr. Jakub Landowski from Ministry of Defense, but also our dear colleague from Faculty of Social Sciences from Geopolitical Studies. He will deliver a speech on security cooperation between the Czech Republic and Muslim countries. So the floor is yours, Dr. Landowski. Here's the mic.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests. It's my honor and pleasure to speak at this conference organized by Charles University and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. I will start with the following initial statement. Czech Republic maintains friendly and cooperative relations with all peaceful countries. However fairy tale it may sound, maybe even a bit naive, I would not treat this initial statement lightly in light of its long history, because all our countries, this statement is a result of a long historic process which started after the 30 Years' War, which was the war with the religious pretext. And what followed was the birth of a system that is relying on sovereign state, openness, cooperation, plurality of entities, and also on another rule, which is that all contracts must be fulfilled, pacta sunt servanda. And this is why the Czech Republic tries and maintains the friendly and cooperative relations with all the peaceful countries. And this is why your organization, OIC, which is striving for oneness, unity, and protection and promotion of Islam and the community of Islam called Ummah, exists also in this pretext of Westphalian order. It's composed of states, multitude of states, with sometimes differing interests, and that's why our cooperation, which I will address in my expose, is very diverse and lively. The history, and it was addressed by my predecessors in the first panel, was not always this optimistic. In history, the large blocks under religious maxims collided on a world map. We had crusades, we had the Arabic conquest, then reconquest, the siege of Vienna. But nowadays, and I'm very happy for it, we are standing side by side in many theaters of war throughout the world, fighting a common enemy. In this case, an enemy that is very, not only dangerous, but somehow, I just could not escape the images that I saw on the television from Manchester. Enemy that has no boundaries in what he can achieve to sow fear in our hearts. And especially in the Middle East, our soldiers are doing a lot, and we have many ways to assist, to train, and also to promote the industrial cooperation which is ultimately necessary to bring this enemy down. The Islamic religion that's very fascinating for us is a religion that shapes the civilization, and we have, in our past, were very fascinated by it. And I couldn't escape reminding the founder of the Czech Oriental Sciences, Professor Alois Musil, who was sort of a Czech Lawrence of Arabia. He was fighting in the Middle East, but on the other side of Lawrence Arabia, he was fighting for the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And he founded the Oriental Studies of the Charles University, which is a very long tradition, which was always creating a mutual understanding and sharing of information between all our countries. The other thing that I'd like to address, and it goes with this Westphalian order, is the question of compatibility of political Islam and the Westphalian order, as addressed in Henry Kissinger. And it is my firm belief that the pace, the tempo of world changes is not the same. And we are looking at the current development in the Middle East with a great understanding towards Islamic religion, but with certain consideration or even emotion in regard to the political Islam and the tremors it generates throughout the world scene. And we are trying to maintain something that is very characteristic for the Westphalian order, and that's the stability it brings. And this stability is not imposed from top down. It is organically grown from the relations of states and from the cooperation it brings. And this behavior of states bring an extra portion of value, which is more than simple addition of all the countries within the cooperative formates. So the stability is our goal. And now I will come to more specific questions. This was just a springboard to get there. And for Czech Republic and for Europe, the stability and our ambition in stability is becoming more and more concentrated on our location on the globe. And we are probably, as Europeans, are not able to maintain the global ambition. And this brings our countries together in a quest to stabilize the vicinity of European territory. And we have, as a Ministry of Defense, working under the auspices of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, found many useful ways to bring stability or to help to bring stability to your respective countries. In the Middle Eastern territory, I would specifically name countries that are long-term partners to the Czech Republic. These countries are Jordan, Iraq, Egypt, United Arab Emirates, and many others. And we should maybe do more. For example, Egypt, and I see the Egyptian ambassador, is so crucial for the stability of the region. Not only geographically, that it connects the Mashrek and Maghreb, it's also a key pillar of economic stability of the region, which is now deeply connected with the internal feeling of security of the Czech citizens. And this connection is through the streams of people escaping the Middle Eastern region to Europe. And this is another impetus for the cooperation that exceeds the ratio of defense that is going to other sectors. And I've visited Jordan, for example, with our Prime Minister, and I saw many good projects in the refugee camps in the area, electricity and other things. And now, more specifically to the military cooperation. We have a long history as a Czech Republic in terms of protection against the weapons of mass destruction. When the first Gulf War broke out, Czech Republic was one of the countries that were prepared to help, and we helped the civilian sector by importing or exporting the means of protection against the chemical attacks, and we also sent our units to the region. And this left a deep impact of partnership in the region and also with our allies. So we are prepared to increase our help in the area of countering biological, radiological and nuclear weapons. And we will most probably send our unit to Iraq. Iraq is one of our particular focus for the Ministry of Defense because, and this brings together business and defense, Czech Republic and Iraq signed a deal about export of one of our subsonic fighters L-159. And it's quite remarkable that a small country like Czech Republic with 10 million people produces something so elaborate as a subsonic fighter jet plane. And this was also concluded, the deal was also concluded because of the long-term cultural relation and scientific relation between the countries. The group of generals that I met included two generals that spoke very good Czech. I was surprised by that, and I asked. And they told me that they studied at the University of Antonín Zápotocký in Brno, now the University of Defense, and thus I realized that it would be very useful to bring this opportunity of paid stipends, of paid scholarship to your countries. And our minister decided that we will be able to produce full scholarships starting from the next year for our valued partners that I have named and for the countries to which we'd like to establish the good relations for the future. The military part of the cooperation, because the aircraft was a business case, was keeping these aircraft perfectly operating and flying in the theater of war in a warlike conditions. So the Czech Republic sent on its own expense a team of 30 people, ground personnel, pilots, to help to train the Iraqi pilots and to help to keep the aircrafts flying. And it brings result. I think the ambassador of Iraq is here to confirm that this is quite useful. And the air superiority is a key part in the strategy to fight enemy like Daesh. In Jordan, we have several programs concerning CBRN and also concerning cultural awareness, which was somewhat strange at the beginning for me to pursue this road. But then I realized that for the Czech military serving in the condition in Islamic countries, it is super important to understand the cultural differences and well adapt themselves for living in your environment, to be the good guests. And the whole idea of a guest is in all our religion a very sacred one. And in the past it wasn't possible for a person to travel without this basic hospitality given to a guest. So I'd like to thank all your countries for the perfect hospitality to our soldiers. Another part that I'd like to address, and this is particularly interesting for another valued partners like Azerbaijan and Pakistan, is the area of military-industrial cooperation. And in this case, it's very important to realize that in Islamic countries, mostly the military industry sector could be not privately owned, but with some kind of governmental involvement, either joint venture or fully controlled by the government. And thus, we should strive for more top-level visits between our countries, which are indispensable for creating and developing our business relations. And in this regard, I'd like to confirm that the Czech policy, Czech export policy, on which the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Industry, and Ministry of Defense are all equal parts. It's under the auspices of Ministry of Industry, is now more open to exports. And it's historically a big change, because in the 90s, the whole idea was to convert our national defense industry to something else. It was the spirit of the time, and we were going through the transformation of our armed forces. And this transformation left us with the very special capabilities that might be important to our partners in the stream or in the, let's say, belt of Islamic countries going from Morocco to Indonesia. And that's the ability, for example, to keep the Soviet-era technology up to date, modernize it, and keep it flying, or keep it operating, which in environments like Afghanistan might be really indispensable. And we are keeping this capacity under the auspices of the ministry in our two companies, LOM and VOP. LOM is for aircraft and helicopter, and VOP is for the ground vehicles. What is also important is that, we are a small country of 10 million people, and we don't have the resources that organizations such as yours can bring together. All we have is goodwill and certain niche capabilities and open hearts. And another thing that we have is that we do understand the worldview of your countries, and I think we still can count on the basic values that we all share, and that this common enemy I was addressing at first has totally violated and basically brought us together. And I hope that even after the territorial defeat of Daesh, we will keep striving to suppress the violent and extreme organizations that pose a danger for both our societies in a very cooperative fashion. I started with an optimistic statement, and I will end up with the same optimism, and I'm looking very much forward for the questions you pose. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Landowski, and now I would like to give the floor to Professor Michal Mejstřík, representing here Institute of Economics and also International Chamber of Commerce.
Let me just say a couple of words, because I believe that as an economist and finance person, I believe that business, this is sometimes called, business people are sometimes called merchants for peace. Yeah. And this is absolutely crucial to understand that more business we develop mutually, the more understanding, because whenever you understand your people, when you work with them, you know, if you just, it's nice to have a conference like today. I've seen many conferences, yeah. But only when I would work with each of you, and I was working in 30 countries around the world, you know, I can only say that if we are able to do jointly some business, maybe achieve some significant result, this is something which can bring us further. And this is my long-term strategy. I am not a short-term oriented person, yeah. So, number of you might remember that already 5 years ago, I started to work very closely with your group of ambassadors. And at that time, already we initiated and I presided big events like East-West Business Forum, which was visited by 250 participants from 30 countries, with OIC member countries mostly, and so on. Then, because I'm also a finance person, I understand that Islamic banking is something what can be somewhat different culture, but we should understand each other. And that is why I also organized this jointly with OIC, this Islamic Banking Conference in 2012. And there were 200 participants. Then there were a number of other meetings. But I must say that since then, this situation was further developed. We have seen many activities of International Monetary Fund, by the way, in the field of Islamic banking and so on. I personally visited a number of those institutions in Malaysia, you know, and the other countries and so on. So I'm not a naive guy. On the other side, you know, a couple of my students were very successful to prepare at the university, Charles University, at our institute, pretty nice even diploma thesis or doctoral thesis in that field jointly with French counterparts from Strasbourg and so on. So I believe that understanding those principles, which can be at the very first sight looking like different, this is another feature, because otherwise, if we do not understand what the sukuk is and so on, so we are not a finance people. Of course, I was always trying to motivate Czech government to visit those countries in person. as far as you know, Mr. Zeman, president, visited some 2 years ago a couple of Arabic countries. It was not such a big event like Mr. Trump recently, but still, it was a kind of unique case. There was some mission of Mr. Mládek, Minister of Industry and Foreign Trade, and so on. There are a couple of groups in this region, like Czech Entrepreneurs Club in Dubai. I'm also vice chairman of some Gulf Council and so on. So we are trying to find out some reasonable ways how to understand each other, but I am the one who is criticizing the Czech government, frankly speaking, that we should be much more active at the top level, like Prime Minister visit and so on, which I miss very much. And I openly admitted that to our Prime Minister, by the way. On the other side, you know, what is interesting that I was also one of those who prepared a couple of years ago a new export strategy. The idea was to widen the activities from EU also to non-EU. What is interesting result is that the number of Czech exporters grew very significantly if you look at this. So we have now 14,000 exporters outside EU. And they were some 10,000 6-7 years ago. So interesting point, yeah. And what about the result? In spite of all those activities, the export growth for EU was still growing, but export growth to non-EU was not so much growing. So we are not like Great Britain with Commonwealth countries with 55% of export going outside EU, but we have just 15% or 16% of exports going outside EU because our dynamics growth is oriented mostly towards EU. I still find it as not a nice diversification. There is much of space because we have wonderful product. Actually, my preceding speaker was giving you wonderful examples. And I like a number of those products, for example, in defense industry, which are highly competitive, but not adequately promoted. Yeah. And of course, Czech government was active, by the way. We had 14 missions to Brazil, but, you know, 0 as a result. We had a number of missions to a few other countries, China, but the export to China is still half of exports to Russia at this point. So there is plenty of space for the future development. And if you look at the results, so already what was mentioned here, total exports to OIC countries represents $6 billion US, yeah, just as of the last year. And what is most interesting is territorial dynamics in 2016 last year. Look at this, China, that was a very insignificant growth of 3%. Russia was after a big decline, declining somewhat less. US was growing originally, but last year was not so successful. But Middle East was growing as the only region for the 3rd year in a row. So basically, if you ask me, is there any positive development? So I would say that at least at this respect, there is certain development because Latin America decreases, Africa as well, and so on. So I must admit that this is something which points out that Islamic countries are, in spite of all problems, seen as a most dynamic part of our export currently. Of course, on the other side, in Europe, outside EU, in Europe, we are still having the strongest point in German partner, with 1/3 of our export to EU going directly to Germany, but 60% of it, and one should not forget it, is so competitive that it's further exported very often also to OIC countries. Yeah. This is interesting. But, of course, the problem is that value added of those exports is missed because the German exporters are much more aggressive, dynamic, assertive than the Czech ones. And it's partially also due to the activity of its Prime Minister, Angela Merkel, who is flying back and forth, and actually German group is extremely active. So it's pity to find out that 60% of our going to Germany is re-exported, and Germany is making its value added from trade out of it. Just a couple of few dates, I do not want to bother you anymore, but if you look at already starting from 2013, all throughout Europe, so all those countries which we are discussing are still important. Turkey is, even last year, a very positive, target of Czech exports. Yeah. The same is true, as I already mentioned, for the other Arabic countries and Qatar, for example, and so on. I wouldn't judge it as an unsuccessful strategy, but it's still not enough. Egypt, of course, is the biggest African market for the Czech Republic. We are having a couple of foreign direct investments there. I visited Egypt several times, and this is very nice and interesting collaboration which is now being developed in these days. Of course, there are even Middle Asian countries, sometimes with certain presence of Muslims, which are historically from the time of our previous Soviet times, our counterparts and so on. So, as far as you see, China, which is so strong so far, is actually not quite as high as we would expect. Imports from China 10 times of our exports. On the other side, countries like South Korea, Japan, and a few other ones, these are the countries which are still, with certain volatility, countries of interesting development, and India as well. So, just in short, I would like to summarize. I believe that business is really the important part of the collaboration, which I would not like to give it up at all. On the other side, for the business, also those exporters, and we have seen 14,000 exporters, and if you look, for example, just for for Turkey, 1,577 exporters are exporting just to Turkey. Yeah, imagine. So it's pretty high number. So there are plenty of companies interested in that. There is 600, actually 1,000 for UAE and so on. So these are significant numbers. So there are groups of people here in the Czech Republic, very important business groups, which are interested in that region. And this is my optimism for the future. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor, for your contribution. And so far, we have covered political, economic, and security aspects of our joint cooperation. And now I'd like to pass the floor to Dr. Petr Pelikan, who is a, let's say, prominent expert on the Islam and in the Czech Republic. So, floor is yours, Dr. Pelikan.
Dobrý den. Já bych chtěl úvodem, než si nasadí sluchátka, popřát přítomným i nepřítomným muslimům žijícím dočasně nebo trvale v České republice klidné prožití nadcházejícího měsíce Ramadánu a připomenout kolegům islamofobům, že jestliže se někdo postí a rozjímá, tak to rozhodně neporušuje ničí svobody a není třeba ho proto jakkoliv perzekuovat. Existence islámu a život muslimů v Evropě je neoddiskutovatelným faktem, se kterým se prostě střetáváme a potkáváme. To, že tato existence muslimských komunit není bez problémů, o tom svědčí konec konců i konání této konference. Velmi často, když se...
Oftentimes, when we are talking about root causes of problems and potential solutions for these problems, we perceive them through the glasses or through the optics of Western European science, sociology. We are talking about social exclusion, about unemployment, etc. And we actually refuse to look at the challenge from inside, from within Islam and the Islamic law. I've heard quite a lot of people say different things. Imams, for example, who spread hatred and instigate hatred. But those who raised this issue, would they be able to tell us who exactly was doing this and when it happened and what forms it actually adopted? So let me just sum up a couple of facts which can be used as a launchpad for an informed debate in between the two parties. The European system has been, since the times of Renaissance, based on certain agreement, social agreement. And whatever we agree on becomes a binding norm. We've gotten used to this pacta sunt servanda as something positive, and we call it a positive way forward. And what we actually keep forgetting is that this social agreement oftentimes takes dramatic turns and twists. The principles move from right to left. We arrive at dead ends, and we find it very difficult to find our ways out. I can mention a lot of examples of these abrupt turns. For example, the attitude of the Western society to gay people, to suicides, euthanasia, alcohol and drugs, and the acceptability of their consumption and abuse. Islam and the Islamic law are built around the principle of voluntary submission of one to the transcendent will of the God, or of the Lord, better say. And it accepts this God's will through very limited sources. The two primary sources of the Islamic law, and Islamic law is not the rule of law. Sharia is not the rule of law. It's just a set of norms and regulatory principles which entail or which guide, better say, all human activities, and which we in Europe perceive in various categories: morals, consciousness, bon ton, elementary rules, etc. But in the Islamic perception, it becomes one. And these norms we actually draw from two sources, from Quran and from Sunnah. It's a set of messages on what's been said and done by Muhammad the Prophet, who to the Islamic religion serves an example which is worth following. So obviously, while the first principle, the principle of social agreement, is rather dynamic, the other principle is static and rather conservative. And it's not absolutely static, however, because even in the primary sources, we find challenges, we find questions there, we find invitations to entertain your own thoughts within certain limits, of course. And the dynamics of the two principles differ, and of course there must be clashes. There must be clashes there by rule. As to the life of Muslim people, or the stay and living of Muslim people in non-Islamic countries, one has to say that we don't have any texts, any binding texts which we would find in Quran or Sunnah. There are no guidelines for Muslim people living abroad. And that's why we see quite a lot of various and acceptable models which Muslim people living abroad follow. So if I was to sum it up and simplify it, I would say that there are four key principles. One, just be oblivious to everything. And that's pretty simple. We've been oblivious to it for a while, for long. Many Islamophobists say that Islam is being spread with violence and sword. But I would like to draw your attention, or their attention, to the fact that those most populated Muslim countries, Indonesia, African countries, for example, became Islamic voluntarily, and over years and centuries, with Muslim business people coming to the country, and with the local inhabitants just taking over the religion without any force. So that's one role model. There are other ones there too. There, in the history of Islam, which is a paradigm which is always taken over and developed in the current interpretations of the Islamic law, there are examples of Muslim people living under Muslim rule for a certain period of time. The first group of Muslim people who were oppressed in Mecca were sent to Habesh, a Christian town then, where they were accepted by the Christian ruler, positively received. They received protection and hospitality. And the reason was that Prophet Muhammad actually didn't see any difference in between his religious beliefs and religious beliefs of Christians from Ethiopia. For example, when the ruler of Habesh died, Prophet Muhammad actually prayed for him, even though he was not a Muslim. Yet another interpretation, a possible interpretation, would be the following. Accepting the superiority to the local rules of law at times of conflict in between the local principles and the Islam principles. This is based on Quran, on quotations from Quran, and also from prophets' quotations. These quotations always ask for pacta sunt servanda, and Muslim people who move to a territory which is non-Islamic enter into a kind of a peaceful agreement with the local population and will have to play by the rules of that given country. The third possible model is kind of a concept of hospitality, or better say a long-term temporary stay. So Muslim people will always be guests in your country, and as guests they will have to act as guests. That means not violate the rules which are given in the given country, obey by the rules in the given country. The very last and relatively minor concept is the hatred one, the one based on a principle that when the Islamic community was born, the Islamic State with small I and small s, not the IS, the Muslim people were coming and leaving. They lived at home and they lived abroad. Many of them lived abroad, and oftentimes Islamic scholars tell you that Muslims and the non-believers shouldn't live next to one another. They shouldn't see each other's fire, as it's said. Or who is together with the non-believer will be a non-believer. There are postulates like that, and we can't really trace it back. We don't know why Prophet would say things like this, but I don't think what Prophet thought was that Muslim people would live permanently at foreign territories, on foreign territories, I'm sorry. You were talking here about those who spread hatred, and I think if we want peaceful coexistence in between the Muslim population and the local population, we'll have to be absolutely sure about how Islam actually perceives itself, what it builds its argumentation on, so that we can tackle particular problems and outline the rules of peaceful coexistence could be built on principles which are acceptable for all parties involved. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Pelikan. And we have a few minutes for questions and answers. So Please just put your hand in the end if you have any questions. It seems that there are no... Sir, can we have a mic over there, please? Can you just please raise your hand once again?
Halo, já se jmenuji Jiří Mísař.
My name is Jiří Mísař, and I think that Islam has got quite a lot of positive things in its history. In Europe, we've got problems and challenges here with
Jedna příčina je to, že
with low birth rate, and we keep talking about children's rights, and parents, for example, are required to take care of their children, not only when they are little kids, but also when they're older. In many other cultures, children at a certain age start working for the family. They contribute to the wealth of the family, and oftentimes in the Islamic world, they actually are the only money-generating people in the family. Also, look at emancipation. In this country, or in these Western countries, women tend to prefer their work over their family life. And at the moment, more than 50% of children actually live in a single-parent family or are born out of wedlock. So this is a real problem here. It's kind of a schizophrenic situation. On one hand, capital punishment is no longer allowed, but on the other hand, we are pro-abortions. We are killing babies not born yet. In the Islamic world, this is not possible. And it would be great if we were joined by women from the Islamic world who would convert to Christianity, marry Christian men, and help cure this European or Western society, which is relatively ill, I would say. So can't we have Muslim women coming here, becoming Christian and marrying Czech men?
Adopted by Samaritans ethnic group and doesn't work really. It probably goes to Dr. Pelikán.
Možné by to bylo.
You know what? It could be possible, but it wouldn't be in line with the Islamic law. Of course, it has happened, and it will be happening in the future. But there are Islamic leaders who actually accept that Muslim women can marry Christian men or non-believers, but they are not in majority, believe me or not.
Já mám otázku na pana doktora Pelikána.
Question to Dr. Pelikán. You mentioned several times that Islam is being spread voluntarily or accepted voluntarily, or now you were saying that a Muslim woman cannot marry a non-Muslim man by rule, or when people convert to other religion, they are prosecuted, and actually Sharia says that these people should be executed. Can you comment on that?
To, že muslimka si nesmí vzít nemusí.
You know, the thing that a Muslim woman cannot marry a non-Muslim man, it's an element of the Islam law, but it's not applied in all societies. It's really by large on the community. In the Christian church, divorce is somehow not possible, but it's really up to the partners whether they will go to the civilian court and get a divorce there, a civilian divorce. So it's really up to the legislation of individual national state, or it's on the social norms and morals, whether this is acceptable or not. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, what about converts, people who decide to leave Islam? You know, if you read the texts and Quran carefully, it is an act which is punishable by capital sentence. But if you read other texts, Sunnah, for example, you'll find principles there which procedurally make this capital punishment quite difficult. For example, it says there, a person who wants to leave Islam will need a certain period of time, will be given a certain period of time within which the very individual will be able to change his or her mind. What you're probably talking about is this practice, which is actually legal and legitimate in some countries, where people are executed, and it's actually given in the domestic legislation that you will be executed if you decide to convert away from Islam. But this is really about basic principles. And it's more common, this capital punishment, in those areas where there is no state system, but areas which are ruled by various groups or movements.
Okay. Is there any?
My name is Ahmed Obed, although I'm Czech, although my name sounds Arabic. I would like to say one thing concerning to the persecution or non-persecution of Muslims. This is just a political issue because most Muslims marry Christians, or Muslim women married Christian men, and it depends on particular state because different laws are applied in different states. I'm a Muslim, my wife is a Christian, and if my wife wanted me to go to church with her, I had no problem with that. So this is just a political issue, really. And the persecution of those who convert from Islam, this was in a period when there was a war, for example, and these people might have joined the resistance. So people were afraid that when somebody is Muslim and then leaves, converts to some other religion, that he might join the enemy, actually. So this is just a temporary, but it doesn't mean that this is the case today. If you look at Syria, Lebanon, Tunis, Morocco, today, that there's no problem like this nowadays. I think we're just somehow exaggerating the problems here in a political way or as a political argument. Well, do you have any questions? No.
Thank you. I didn't want to interrupt you. Okay. So if there are no questions left, or maybe Dr. Pelikan would like to react to last comments? No. No reaction. So let me, Dr. Landowski.
Thank you very much. If I may, Dr. Pelikan very well touched the core of the issue. And I'm a lawyer, and I tried a lot to study Sharia as a part of my PhD thesis. And he said that in our systems, the legal systems are, everything is derived from a social contract in a way. We have a natural law school, but mostly we are legal positivists. And the social contract, it's a plus and a minus. It can be renegotiated, but it can adapt. If you enter into the contract with the God, it's very hardly negotiated. I wouldn't go into the depth of different approaches between the Shia and Sunni, but it's hardly, it's very stable. On the other hand, it raises the question of compatibility. And in this regard, I said in the beginning, maybe not too well, that we are inherently open as a community of states, which separated religion from politics to cooperation as a system. And I believe it's the same in the Organization of Islamic States. And I believe we can overcome these differences, even though I understand that some rules are stricter and lesser able to be renegotiated within Sharia or within countries that take Sharia as their legal system.
Thank you very much. I will use this conference to thank you, to express my thanks to Czech Republic for big support for our countries. And as Mr. Jakub Landowski is saying, we are a little country, but I will tell him, you are a big role in our countries. Believe me, we appreciate your role in our countries to support our people to fighting terrorism together. And this is, we believe in coalition, international coalition now, which help Iraq in fighting terrorism. I would like to confirm that even small role is coming a big result, because the security of the world, you can't divide it to security in Europe, security in our countries, security in Middle East. The security, this is one unit in all countries. And therefore, fighting against terrorism, we're fighting in Iraq, for example, in state of all the world now. But all the world interesting of their security. And therefore, they must help Iraq. They must help Syrian. They must help Libyan. Therefore, I think the role of Czech Republic in training and the fighting terrorism is huge. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your remark. And Dr. Plekan.
Já už jenom skutečně
Just
velice krátce
like to comment on all these things very briefly and to respond also to the questions, to the partial questions concerning personal relationship between man and God and the punishability or what we understand as family law, civil family law. The Islamic law, there are many partial clauses and they are being discussed in heated discussions a lot and they are being highlighted. However, on the other side, or at the same time, there's also the principle of priority of interest. So where the interest or security of the whole is at risk, then the partial clauses or partial principles may not be adhered to. And this is the principle of the Islamic law to prevent bigger damage. And I think this is something that should be taken into consideration in all the discussions in trying to find a modus operandi for living together with the Muslim communities in Europe.
My last duty is to invite you for a lunch, which is hosted by OIC Prague group. There will be our students downstairs waiting for you, and they will guide you because the lunch is taking place in another building. So please just follow their guidance. Thank you so much for coming, for attending, and have a nice day.